Okay, so I'm Mike McKinnon. This is my second interview for my video project. Um, this time I'm going to be interviewing my mom, Deanna. She's going to be my student for this. I'm going to try and ask her a couple of questions to see what she understands about the class I'm in LA for, which is Intermediate Microeconomics. So I'm just going to try and ask you a couple of different questions about some of the similar topics that we talk about in our class. Some of them are a little bit outside of that, but they have economic applications to them, so I'm going to try and keep it simpler. The main point is I just want to question what you know about this and mainly how you know it, where you learned what you learned. So to begin, where did you go to college?
I went to school at Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science.
And your major there?
Pharmacy.
And throughout your life, your main career was?
To be a pharmacist.
Right. And where did you work?
Ecker Drugs.
And there you were just a pharmacist, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so my class is about economics. During high school or college, did you take any economics classes?
No.
So you have no experience, like even before that, like in middle school or anything?
No, I don't recollect taking any economics courses.
Okay. And then, have you had any other jobs, maybe that could be relative to economics? Like, did you work in retail or anything?
I worked retail, but I did not feel that it was pertaining to economics.
Okay. So, I think we can begin. We've established that my student doesn't really have any prior experience in economics, and like she said, she's a pharmacist, so that doesn't really apply. So, like I said, I'm going to ask you questions. It's not about you being right or wrong. Kind of just want to see the way you think about certain things. You're allowed to ask me questions along the way if you have any for me or something's not clear to me, and you're allowed to ask me to like try and explain it differently. And nobody's going to see this except for my teacher or whoever grades this. So, just so you're aware.
Okay.
So, like I said, my topic's about intermediate microeconomics. Microeconomics is more small scale as opposed to macroeconomics, which is bigger scale. I might have a couple of like more macro questions because they're more general to understand in the beginning. But other than that, my main focus is going to be on the smaller scale economics, which involves like individual families or people and how they react in the economy. And like I said, we're gonna mainly my topic is gonna talk about prices, budget, and utility. I think first we're gonna try and establish a basis for that with supply and demand, and then later on we can talk about some stock and like risky assets versus safe assets in the end. So just a plan of how I want this to go. All right, so first, I guess my first question would be, in your own words, do you have any idea what the word utility means?
Utilities, like an electric bill.
Okay, that's true. In the sense of economics, there's also a different meaning for utility. So if I said consumer satisfaction level, that's more of how it applies to utility. So I understand where your definition came from. But like I said, utility in economics is more of satisfaction level. How about budget in your own words? Could you define budget?
How much you can spend?
Okay. And could you say what determines how much you could spend?
Your income.
So just from what?
I don't know what you
Like-
mean.
Where does your income come from?
How much money you make?
Okay. And then do you think of any other possible ways of income
No.
outside of that? Okay. So, well, we're gonna touch on budgets, like we just talked about and defined, utility, which we talked about before, and prices of things. So, how they're all related is my main thing. But to start, I was gonna talk about supply and demand to help you get a general idea, and I think that's a good starting point. So, have you ever heard of the topics of supply and demand?
Yes.
Could you explain anything you know about them?
No, I can't.
Okay. So if I were to ask you to draw a graph of the supply and demand, would you be able to do that?
No.
Okay. So in order to move this along, I'm just going to go ahead and draw a sample supply and demand curve so that we can further question it. Okay, so that's a basic supply and demand curve. S stands for supply, D stands for demand. So this is pretty much the basic ground of any economics course. Supply and demand plays like a big role in all different areas of economics. So if you were told that prices and quantities are determinants, or no, sorry, if you were told supply and demand are determinants of prices and quantities, could you establish the relationship there?
No.
Okay, so do you think supply and demand has anything at all to do with prices of goods?
I guess so.
Okay, why would you say you guess?
I don't know.
So let's think of something in specific terms that we could talk about with supply and demand. So if I said gasoline that you use to fill your car, what do you think the price of gasoline is determined by? Who or what factors?
Cost of oil.
So you would say who has to accompany for that cost of oil?
I don't know what you're getting at.
Would you say the consumer pays per gallon the direct cost of oil that we get from overseas? Or do you think the government buys it? Or do you think the business, the company, for example, Wawa, that they buy it and sell it?
Maybe.
Maybe which one?
Maybe Wawa.
So you think Wawa buys the gas and then they set their own price for it? So let's say if you have Wawa and I don't know, Sam's Club sells gasoline, and different places don't always have the same gas prices. Do you think the company's price set, as in they set the price of gasoline?
I'm not sure.
Okay. What about if you were grocery shopping? So let's say you grocery shop for something like pretzels, and if there's two different brands and more or less, let's say that both of the brands are pretty much the same except for one is priced lower than the other, which one would you go for?
The lower price.
Right. So Why would you?
Because it's cheaper.
Okay. So then, what would you say on a larger scale is the effect of that? So let's say if brand one is cheaper than brand two, do you think brand one gets more sales? Do you think they get less sales? How do you think they do in comparison to the?
Maybe they get more sales.
They get more sales. So, in terms of demand, do you think a company with like a cheaper product compared to a higher product, do you have any idea of how the demand for those would be? So if you said brand one would probably do better than
I
brand two.
did.
Could you establish how demand works in that? Like demand for their product.
No.
Okay. So we're gonna, I think, look at some other things. Let me see. So if I said that price and quantity were determined somewhere on the supply and demand graph, could you pick a point on this graph that you think price and quantity would be set at?
I'm not sure.
Is there could you, let me see, if I told you that price was on this axis and quantity was on this axis, that's how the typical graph is. Could you now see if there's a clear point at which supply and demand determine price or quantity?
The price would go down perhaps if it's greater supply.
The price would go down, you're saying, if this is greater supply? So as supply goes up, price goes, you said down?
I did.
Okay. And then what about demand? Could you say the same thing in terms of demand?
Yeah.
No, I mean, could you put it into the words of how you said as demand goes one way, price goes another way? Just like you did with supply.
The price goes down when there's increased demand.
Okay. And then, so, after saying that both of those, how supply and demand goes into those, where do you think is a point where they meet?
In the middle.
Could you show me on the graph
Here.
the point where they intersect?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what about quantity? After saying the same thing, just let's just say, where do you think the quantity is going to actually go to?
What?
So you just said price intersects and is determined at this point in the middle where they cross. This is, let me just darken your circle. Now, if we look at quantity, where do you think quantity is going to be determined at?
On the graph?
Yeah, quantity is on this axis. So if you said price stops on this one here, so you said that's where the price is actually going to be. Where would you say quantity is actually going to be?
I don't know.
Okay, that's okay. Uh,
Sure.
that's fine. So, I think we can move on to some of the other topics. So, let me see. So, for this one, I'm going to ask you this bigger, more complex question and just see if you can answer it. If not, then I can try and break it down for you. So, let's say, how can you explain the effect of changes in budget, prices of goods, and utilities consumers are faced with when making decisions? So, how do you think consumers' budget, the prices of goods, and a consumer's satisfaction level are related?
I don't know.
Do you think there's a relation between those three things?
Maybe.
Okay. What about if we just talk about, so let's just start with one of those aspects. Let's say the price of goods. So, kind of like how we did earlier with the pretzels. How do you think a consumer bases their decisions off the price of goods?
Again, if it's a reasonably priced item, they're going to buy it.
So, if you're, to you, what would reasonably priced be?
I need a better definition.
Of what, reasonably priced?
Yes.
Okay, so if we go back to the pretzels one, about two different brands, one's cheaper than the other one. Which one would you say is reasonably priced? Yeah, brand one is cheaper than brand two
Brand one
because it's
was less expensive.
okay. What if brand one and brand two are both set at a really high price? Do you think there's a preference for one of them?
No.
Could you explain why more and at all? If they're both the same price?
They're the same price, you said.
Right. So that's your explanation?
Yes.
They're the same price, so there's no difference really.
Correct.
Okay. So what would you say if we're thinking about not just pretzels, we're thinking about any good? You think the same applies to any other good when the prices are like that, if one is priced cheaper than the other?
Yes.
Okay. So if we say let's talk about gas again then. So you drive a car?
I do drive.
Okay. So you have experience with buying gasoline then, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is there typically one place that you go to consistently buy your gas?
Yeah, there's a place I usually go to get gas.
Where is that?
Speedway.
Okay. Is there something you like about Speedway, or is it prices, or is it the location of the place?
I would say it's the price.
Could you explain that a little bit more for me? So what is it about the price?
It's an affordable price. Some of the gas stations are much higher.
Okay. So let's say the price of Speedway goes up. What would you think you would do?
I may look around for a less expensive gas place.
Okay. And if you found a less expensive gas place, what would you do from there?
Then I would buy the gas for my car there.
Okay. So you would kind of change your habits then.
Most likely.
Okay. Let's say let's say Speedway is still your preferred one. The price hasn't changed. But let's say just a random consumer, let's call him Joe. Let's say he has a regular income, and his income allows him to buy the price of Speedway, just like you have been able to. Let's say he gets laid off, and therefore his income goes down. What would you think Joe would do in terms of the gas that he buys at Speedway?
He may not buy it there.
What would you think he would do then, if he's not going to buy it there?
Look for a cheaper place.
And the reasoning for Joe doing that would be,
He doesn't have as much money. He's going to be on a budget.
okay, fair enough. So let's say let's say from that same situation, everything that we just said stays. Let's say the price of gas goes down. So he got laid off still, and his income's still low, but the price at Speedway, they just so happen to have decreased their gas prices. Good.
Yeah.
What would you think would happen with Joe and how he buys gas there? Yeah.
He would still buy it there.
Because
It's affordable.
okay. So then, if let's say he still gets laid off. He's still going to Speedway, and now the prices are way higher than they were before. Let's just think about Speedway. Would he be more inclined to buy gas still, or like how do you think his satisfaction level would be? He has less money. Let me rephrase to make it a little bit simpler. Joe has less money now. The price of gas goes up. What do you think his satisfaction level is? How do you think his satisfaction level is going to change?
He's probably not as satisfied with the price of the gas at Speedway.
Right. Okay. And then if he were to come along and find another gas station that was cheaper, could you explain maybe what would happen?
He would go there.
Okay. So in the case of, let's just talk about gas prices at Speedway. Let's say you have one situation where you have the same budget but the price is lower, and then you have the same budget but the price is higher. In which scenario would Joe's satisfaction be better?
The lower price gas.
Okay. So if he were to pick the other one, what would you say in terms of his satisfaction?
It would go down.
His satisfaction level would go down?
I think so.
Okay. So could you explain just what would be causing that? So what was the difference between the two situations?
The prices.
Okay. And then, so if we were to say the same thing, gas is the same price at Speedway 1, or, well, let's not say Speedway 1, let's say, let's just call it two different situations, both at Speedway. The prices are still the same. He has less money in the one situation than he does in the other. How could you come to a conclusion about his satisfaction? What could you conclude?
He's not going to be as satisfied with a high price gas.
Okay, but in this one, I'm saying they're the same price. He just has less money. He's got less money in situation 1 than he has in situation 2.
I don't know.
You know, that's okay. So let's keep going for this part. So let's look at I'm going to draw a simple utility and budget line underneath here. So this first line, I'm going to put a B here. It's going to be budget. And then let's say the second line, it's the first utility line. So like we said, utility is basically satisfaction. So the budget line is all the things that we'll stick with our made-up person Joe can afford. So if you were to pick any area on this graph that Joe could afford, it could be any area. Where do you think Joe can afford whatever it is? We can still say gas.
Like maybe here.
You said he can afford that one. Okay. So let's say he's got a second utility curve that we're going to draw. Could you explain the difference between utility 1, this one, and utility 2, this one, in terms of Joe's satisfaction?
No.
Okay. What if I put some arbitrary numbers to them, and I said his utility at this one is 5, and his utility at the second one is 3. Does that help you to see any difference in satisfaction there?
Yeah.
Alright, could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, are you saying in terms of the numbers?
In terms of the numbers on the graph. Yeah, however you think it makes sense to you.
Three is the lower number.
Okay, so then keep going with that.
Be more satisfied
With which one?
with utility number 2 because the number is 3.
Okay. If I were to draw another utility line, and let's say we would label that utility 1, you think he would? What would you think Joe would pick?
The lower number.
Whichever number is lower. Okay. So what about if we let's talk about prices again, and so when you're grocery shopping, do you grocery shop?
I go to the grocery store, yeah.
What normally determines what you buy?
What I need and the price.
Okay. Could you explain any more? Like, do you think what you need and the price, there's a relation between them?
Yes.
Or could you say, like, let's say you really, really need a toothbrush, but you don't really need dish soap, how would you, what would you say is how you determine which one you want? Or which one you actually buy, excuse me.
Between a toothbrush and just dish soap?
Yeah, but we're going to assume you need a toothbrush more. Which one would you be more inclined to actually buy?
The toothbrush.
Okay. What if the price of the toothbrush is higher and the price of the dish soap is lower, but you still need the toothbrush more? Which one do you think you're actually going to buy?
The toothbrush.
Okay, and then just your conclusion about why you think you'd buy the
There's
toothbrush.
greater demand.
Okay. In terms of the dish soap, how could you say what you just said in terms of why you wouldn't buy the dish soap?
It's a lower demand.
Okay. So, if we think about just one good, so we can go back to, let's say, pretzels. So if you plan on going to the store and buying pretzels, let's say, what factors do you think go into you actually buying the pretzels?
The price.
Okay. Is there anything else?
How much I want it.
Okay, that's fair enough. So if the price goes up, what would you react? How?
I may not want it
Okay. If the
based on the price.
okay. If the price goes down, how would you react?
Then I would get it.
Okay. What did you think? There's a more likelihood you get more than one bag of pretzels if it's cheaper?
Sure.
Okay. Let's then say you're still talking about pretzels. The price isn't going to change, but how much the demand for pretzels is going to change. Let's say there's more demand for pretzels as opposed to less demand. What do you think is actually going to happen?
I'd buy the pretzels.
Okay. Could you explain that a little bit more in your own words?
You just said they were in greater demand.
Okay. Why don't we move on to the last thing that I said we were going to talk about, which is kind of like stocks and interests on certain things. So, do you have any money in stocks, or are you familiar with the stock market at all?
I have investments in stock.
Okay. What about like government bonds or anything? Interest rates? Have you had any experience with a bond?
No.
How about interest rates, let's say, on your credit cards? Do you have a credit card that you have to pay interest on, or a bank account that you earn interest on?
What about the interest rate?
So let me break that down. Do you have a bank account that you earn interest on?
Yes.
Okay, so let's stick with that. Let's say the interest rate, actually let's just say, how did you choose the bank you did when considering the interest rate?
Based on the interest rate, if it was a higher interest rate.
Okay, could you explain what the higher interest rate meant for you, like what you were considering? So let's say if there's a higher interest rate,
Then that's the most likely bank I would go to.
because
Of the higher interest rate.
okay, So let's say if your interest rate goes down, could you talk about your utility or satisfaction level?
Well, I wouldn't be as satisfied with the banking place.
Yeah, so then what do you think about demand and interest rates? Let's say we just said that there is a decrease in your interest rate in your bank. Now, what do you think about demand?
A decrease in the interest rate.
Right. So how does that influence demand?
Would decrease?
Okay. If that's what you think. And then I think why don't we focus on some like stocks. Let's say that government bonds are usually work that you invest an amount of money, and no matter what happens to the economy, you're pretty much guaranteed to get the interest on your money back because the government doesn't default. So let's say that that's a safe investment.
Yeah.
But in a risky investment, so let's say you invest in a stock company, there's a likelihood that you could get a lot of money or you could get a lot less money. So let's say that's a risky asset. What would you invest in?
Wherever I can get a lot of money.
So out of those two, I said the safe or the risky one. And then
A safe one.
because
I don't know what you're getting at.
so let's say you put $100 into a safe one, and you're gonna put the risky one $100. So let's put some actual numbers so this maybe makes more sense. Let's say you get a 10% interest on your $100.
Right.
That's 110. So in the end, you get 110. And then let's say if you invest in a good company or bad. Let's say in the bad one you lose 30%, and a good one you gain 40%. So this would be 140, or you could get 70. So ideally there's only two, you can only make one choice, but in the risky one you don't know how it's going to end up, right?
Right.
So you could get a lot more money or you could get less money. So which one of these would you invest in?
The safe bet.
And could you say why compared to the risky one? That's what you chose?
Because there's a chance that the money all disappear.
Okay. So in terms of demand, could you highlight on that? The differences in demand for a safe one compared to a risky one?
No.
Okay. I think we can end it there.
Michael,
What?
I don't like doing this.